There we go.
All right, so we are recording, and that hopefully will be posted on our website, and we'll adjust quality as needed. So format tonight, similar. David's going to give his talk. There'll be some Q&A. We do have some refreshments from culinary out there afterwards, along with some decaf coffee and some water. After we break up after the Q&A here, David's going to hang out here and answer any individual questions that you guys might have. So please feel free to do that. Okay? Let's see. All right. Okay, let's go. Dr. McCuan joined the faculty of SSU in fall of 2003. His expertise rests in two broad areas: American politics and international relations. His doctorate was granted from the University of California, Riverside in 2002. He does research in two areas: state and local elections and the study of terrorism. His teaching responsibilities include courses in both international and national politics, international security and terrorism, state and local politics, campaigns and elections, that's why we're here tonight, and political behavior. Dr. McCuan was a Fulbright teaching scholar in 2009-2010, working in the Department of International Relations and European Studies, Masaryk University, Czech Republic, where he taught courses in U.S. national security policy, terrorism, and U.S. foreign policy. It is with great pleasure to welcome back to the Spark Center, Dr. David McCuan.
Thank you, Kurt. Nice to see you all. So many repeat offenders. That's kind of nice. I'm going to go fast. I have a lot to say to present to you. I will give Kurt the slides, so you'll be able to get those. I'll probably say something that's offensive or inappropriate and tick you off. That's okay. That's what I do. I look forward to the Q&A. There'll be plenty of time for that. You can also email me with any questions, comments, or concerns. I'm happy to give you the president of the university's email or my dean's email. It's fine. I've got tenure. It's cool. I do a lot of work all over the world now and all over the country. I was telling Kurt on election night, election week, I decided to say no to none of the media. So I did CBS National overnight on election night, which was kind of cool. But I spent 4 days where I only slept 2 hours a day for 4 days. Just said yes to everybody all over the world for media, and I only mixed up when I was doing Turkish television in Istanbul that I thought I was in Germany talking about Berlin. I only did that once, but I tried to just go and see what I could do 22 hours a day for 4 days. I did 94 media interviews during that time, everywhere from like the New York Times to like, I don't know, the Healdsburg Tribune, I think, whatever it was. Just yes to everybody across every medium. I did 4 interviews with Russian dissident groups from their homes, their salons, dining rooms in Moscow, which was very interesting because I do a lot of work on Russian disinfo, and I'm going to show you some of that near the end. Some things to look at. I'm going to take you into a news story that was put up by the Kremlin out of St. Petersburg from a server room. I'm going to take you like as close as you can get to like the Russian government disinformation as possible. So some things I'll show you that'll be pretty cool. If you can't write something down or you shouldn't go to that place at home, I'll let you know that. If you want to go to your ex's house and go to that place, you can do that. But I'll show you a couple of things related to that that are kind of helpful for what's going on in the disinfo space. The reason I mention that is I just got back from Europe literally last night. I gave talks in Germany and in France, and I gave some talks in Strasbourg at the EU Parliament. It's all about Russian disinformation and what's going on. The Europeans are light years ahead of us in terms of this stuff and what's happening, and it's real and it's fascinating. And you might have seen, for example, that the British took out 94 people today relative to a Bitcoin narco syndicate organized crime thing that was going on with disinformation tied to that. It's a really big business and a really big deal and where things are going, and always raises the question about, you know, what do we know about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation? They're all different. and I'm a former student who's doing cutting-edge work on this in Washington, D.C. So hopefully we'll relate some of that stuff as we're looking at what's going on. That gives you kind of a forward-looking sense of where this research and the models and the things that we do, where that's all going. All right, so there are certain 10 commandments about the election. We want to start with the 10 commandments that basically I presented in April to see whether they worked or not. This particular election, what we learned, we'll start with that. We'll look at this in terms of broader changes up and down the ballot. We'll look at how Trump and the GOP fashioned such a broad victory, what that looks like, and then what conditions and expectations can we have moving forward. For example, some of you may have heard about Project 2025. Maybe I'm the only one in the room who read all 927 pages of it. You're welcome. And in that process, you don't want to pay attention to what's in Project 2025. You want to pay attention to his think tank that he's running out of Mar-a-Lago, the America First policy team, because all the people that are being named are coming out of America First. They're not coming out of the Project 2025. So there's kind of a little shake and bake and differences here, but it gives you kind of an insider view as to what's going on. So we'll go through all of that. All right, first just to show you, since I pay attention to broader demographic shifts and data, and what's happening is states that gain votes and states that lost votes for basically the presidential election of 2020 through adjustments of the U.S. Senate into 2024. And as you can see, California loses a seat, but so does kind of the New York and Rust Belt states. And then we have a couple of states that are gaining a little bit of population, and as a result, they go up, right? Democrats living the pipe dream that Texas can become Democratic at some point. Florida become much more deeply Republican than it's ever been. Anyone know this state?
Colorado.
Thank you, Colorado. Colorado is important because it has demographics that are closest to the United States as a whole. So it's a good barometer. It's a good forward-looking barometer of what's to come. And it's also a very interesting state because there's Boulder, the Berkeley of Colorado, and then there's Golden, Colorado, where Reagan and a lot of conservatives did a lot of things in the 1980s with the Contras and what was going on with the CIA and things like that. So Colorado is a very important kind of barometer state to pay attention to as we're moving forward, but it just gives you an idea more broadly of population shifts in the United States. All right, so here's what happened, right? Anyone remember what Donald Trump got in 2020 in terms of 2016 in terms of electoral votes, 2016? 306. 306. So he's been on the American political scene for 10 years, and he got +6 electoral votes, all right? He got 6 more electoral votes. And you look at this and you're like, wow, okay, here's some vote totals. The vote difference is about 1.6 now, today. But turnout is way down. Lesson number 1, turnout is way down. Turnout this election is 95% of what it was in 2020, 95%. You have a more diverse population, you have more voters, persons of color, younger voters that constitute what's technically called the VEP, the voting eligible population. The VEP is the formal way that we measure who's voting. The VEP and then the VAP, the voting age population, and that forms the voting population. But the VEP is much higher, and turnout is much lower. Turnout is much lower because young people didn't turn out, okay? They didn't have that Swifty effect, didn't have that beehive effect, but other demographics also didn't show up. And all our models predicted that turnout would be 95 to 105% of 2020, and it was not. And remind yourselves that her campaign lasted 97 days, and she spent $1 billion in 97 days. How much is that per day? $94.7 million they spent per day to lose. They spent $100,000 to build a set so she could be on Call Her Daddy. They paid for her to be on that set, to build that set for $100 grand for a 30-minute podcast. All right, so they were spending money all over the place. Again, about $95 million, más o menos, over those 97 days. Okay? All right, so here are the 10 commandments. Let's take a look. Presidential approval, as reported by Gallup.com, if it sits around 41 or 42%, it's bad for the incumbent party. It's bad. I run the mathematical model that looks at likely vote and what should happen based on kind of presidential popularity and economic conditions, some economic variables. That model, just after leaving you in April, that model in May showed Joe Biden had an 8 or 9% chance of winning re-election. 8 or 9%. When the president wins re-election at a 72% rate. So the opportunity for him was not narrow, it was non-existent. And that was very clear. The White House runs a similar model, a couple other fancy political scientists run similar models, and we all showed, in totality, a single-digit chance of re-election. And part of the driver of that is just kind of the finger in the wind of approval of the president. If the approval is less than 41, 42%, the likelihood of re-election plummets. And as it hits 40%, the curve gets steeper, or the dive gets deeper, wave gets deeper and deeper and deeper. You hit 38, 39, you start to go like this. It's a very powerful barometer of what can happen. And Joe Biden's approval, 39% around election time, 39%. So just knowing that number, if you were a betting person like me, where would you put your money? You put your money on the other person, based upon presidential approval. Because the vice president has difficulty doing what?
Separating themselves from the president.
From the president. So tell us, Madam Vice President, what you would do differently than President Joe Biden. Remember the question?
Yeah.
Well, you know, well, we're different people. So we're going to make different decisions and process different things. But, you know, I can't think of a single thing I'd do differently. And she returned to that 7 days later. This happened 3 weeks out from the election. The fact that she and her team had not anticipated handling that question, kind of a problem. Okay? Hugely important. Now, I worked for Kamala Harris for 4 days. 4 days. When she announced running for U.S. Senate. My job was to help her and her team prep her for the rollout. So the 2 days running up, the rollout, and then the next day. 4 days. And she was an excellent candidate at coming in and learning and learning and learning that day. We went down to LA and stood on Villa Rugosa's neck. He was LA mayor who wanted to run. He did stuff in Hollywood because of Doug, and what was going on, raised a ton of money, and she was excellent. But she has to be carefully handled, and she has to be delicately handled in terms of what she's doing and how she's exposed. So that means you do go on the Joe Rogan podcast because he has 33 million listeners. That is more than the New York Times, MSNBC, Fox, and the major news networks every day combined. That's how big Joe Rogan is. Not because he'll endorse you, but because you need to get 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 Joe Rogan voters. That's all you need. You don't need 3 out of 4. You don't need 2 out of 4. 3 out of 5. You need 1. That's all you need. So there's some tactical things to pay attention to as we're going through this. All right. The Electoral College rule, it only matters to 270. Trump got 312. He went from 306 to 312. Okay? Not a big, steep thing. It's hard for Democrats to get significant amounts of the vote, all things being equal. It's 53% since the Daisy spot, if you've ever heard or remember the Daisy spot, or seen the picture with a little girl. All right, we gotta go back to that election where Democrats did really well. Economic growth, the pocketbook, and consumer sentiment, still good indicators of what's going on. As you're going to see with, I told you turnout first, and the other thing is inflation. Inflation. 54 democracies held elections the last year. In all 54 democracies, the ruling party lost vote share significantly. In countries, conditions where inflation had risen in the past year, or inflation was an issue in the past year, all 54 ruling parties lost vote share, including in the United States. Inflation, as a political consultant, in one of the things we were involved in after the election, said inflation is the death knell of democracy. It is such a weight and such a huge deal that it killed every ruling party in every democracy that held an election in the last year. All right, there were elements of, did we see things related to, say, the politics of the pandemic, fading as an issue, social upheaval, think kind of the tragic killing of George Floyd, elements like this? Unclear that these issues matter. Abortion and Dobbs? No, did not. 48%, according to the exit polls, and I'm still running the data all the time, 48% of the exit polls show us, of those voters that thought that abortion was a top 3 issue, 48% of them voted for Donald Trump. Okay, 48%. Suburban women, 51% of them voted for Donald Trump, and abortion was the top 5 issue for them. So abortion is an issue, important, but not as important as inflation or economic growth, or would you be different than the other guy? In other words, the concept of change. Then we see some elements here of the defund movement or wokeism, this type of thing. There's some evidence of this. We'll look at that a little bit. And then where there's things related to, say, transgender rights and the backlash against that. The #1 issue amongst Alaskan voters, okay, granted there's 3 of them, but the #1 issue amongst Alaskan voters, according to the exit polls, are transgender takeover in high schools. You know how many transgender students there are in Alaska in high school? It is the #1 issue in Alaska politics, according to the exit polls, affecting one person. The idea is the propaganda kind of affected it, the word public opinion. All right? Who votes? Okay, turnout way off, right? And some areas of the counties, or some areas of the country, some counties matter more than others. I pointed this out, or tried to point to you to this in April. There are 3,100 counties in the United States, but only about 15 to 20 of them really matter. And half of those counties would not vote for her because of who she is. And who is she? A woman and a person of color. She had to be 5 points ahead. 5 points ahead in swing state counties 1 month out. Her staff knew this. I worked with many of these people. They're top notch. They knew this, and they knew they weren't there a month out. They knew they weren't 5 points ahead, and they weren't 5 points. They knew they had to be 5 points ahead because of gender and racial bias in that order. Gender bias is stronger than racial bias, but together they're quite problematic for a candidate. Right? So there's a gender effect, a gendered effect, and a racial effect. All right. So let's do the big picture first. Sorry, busy slide. 97 days, $95 million a day. Okay. We talked about inflation just briefly. But you can also look at, is the country headed in the right or wrong direction? Is the country headed in the right or wrong direction? And on election day, how many people thought the country was headed in the right direction? According to Gallup? 1 out of 4. 1 out of 4. What's that tell you? You're not in a good way. 1 out of 4. That's before you get to presidential approval. I just clicked in where you can just click on this and go right out to those things. And turnout. So you've got here basically 2 elements: right, wrong direction, presidential approval, and turnout. And those elements really determine what's going on. And inflation serves as a proxy for this. Okay? He wins across the board, right? He's historic. He wins by 1.6% and has a +6 electoral college. Okay, that's not a mandate. It's not. They own the Senate and they own the House, barely. But remember, there isn't one Freedom Caucus. There are 4 of them. And that presents some problems for Republicans kind of in terms of what they do. So that means they have to hit the ground running. And it isn't 100 days that they have. They have 50 days to get things kind of going, because the schedule becomes problematic. And ironically, the 50 50-day mark puts them quite right around April Fool's Day. So that's your barometer, right? April Fool's Day is right about the period where you can make an assessment of how they're doing. Because there is this guy who's involved with them who happens to be the richest guy in the world, and that would be, okay, how long do you think that egomaniac is going to remain in their fold? September? 2 months? Right? You're a cynic. Yeah, he's not going to be there for very long. VBAC, all these people, you put all these zillionaires in the room together, and guess what's going to happen? They're going to clash. And it's going to be this way for a little bit. They'll be fine, and then they're going to go poof. Is what's going to happen. And that means you only have a little bit of time to get things done for them. All right. So a couple of things did hold true. Debates don't matter. Vice presidential selections don't matter. More money doesn't matter. Right? Message of change seemed to matter. And it's hard to be the change candidate when you're associated with the administration that 1 in 4 people think the country's headed in the right direction. That's a difficult place to be. Okay, here's a quote from one of the consultants. So what I did after the election is went to a Zoom with a bunch of Democratic consultants who decided they were going to eat their young. They had more money than God, and they were going to just destroy each other. And then I went to a meeting of a bunch of Republican consultants who everything they did created, like, I don't know, water, heaven, written communication, and everything that's good and right in the world. In both cases, those groups are wrong. Those individuals are wrong. But there were some important kind of reflections about what happened, especially about inflation and an idea that Democrats were not speaking to working people. But that's not a 2024 phenomenon. Joe Biden got a bit more of the working class voter in 2020, but that's only because Democrats have been fracturing that group since 2008, really have been fracturing that group since 1964. Or the way one consultant framed it is Democrats have to do a better job of speaking to people who shower after work and not before work. All right? Which I think kind of captures eloquently the importance of working class people. Because the strongest group of working class voters, of new working class voters, is 22% of their population were first-time voters in 2024. 22%, more than 1 in 5 first-time voters of all Latinos voted for the first time in 2020. Working class Latino votes was the key element affected by inflation, by COVID, lingering pandemic effects, difficulties about what was going on, and they are a key element that Democrats were not speaking to. And that's an important element here of the messaging that you see in the exit polls. All right. So, it represented more than a White House victory in some ways. It's like a political resurrection. This would be the rhetoric he would use. Not surprising, and I don't even think that's maybe strong enough for the rhetoric. But you have to remember that we're in a period of great upheaval. This is why I love what I do in terms of teaching, because it's so damn exciting what's happening. Don't get depressed. It's half full and we're going to be okay, because look what's going on for 10 years. We are all over the map. Republicans win the Senate, take the White House. Democrats win the House. Democrats win the White House and the Senate. We're in the midst of great upheaval, back and forth. So looking at this, what should happen in 2026? What should Democrats retake? The House, not the Senate. The Senate is going to be Republican for 10 years, 8 years. 8 to 10 years, it will be Republican. But Democrats, under this model, keep going back and forth, should take the House. Which means the 2026 election is now. The 50 days have started even earlier. The 100 days have started even earlier. We are in this great place of upheaval in our politics, which is kind of cool, because small change can be a big deal. The last congressional race in the country was called last night at 5 o'clock. Congressional District 13, Adam Gray versus John Duarte. I have John Duarte's daughter in my class at Sonoma State, and I brought him to class to talk, which was not comfortable for him, I'll put it that way, okay? Because I grilled him. He's a Trumper, and I just let him have it, all right? He owns a family florist business. That's one of the most successful floral businesses in the United States. 55% of his workers are not legal residents in this country, which means what's going to happen in his family business is going to go into shitter. It's okay, right? And so I will call him on this. But he lost his seat by 187 votes. Every single vote cast matters. And I can't emphasize this enough to you. Every single vote matters. Since 2022, there have been more than 1,500 elections in the United States decided by less than 30 votes. Yeah, okay, most of these are about mosquito abatement district and school district and stuff like that. But votes matter in a big way because we are so darn close, and we will remain so headed into the 26th and 28th period. Something to remember. Okay, so there's important impacts then of this change election. Small movements get magnified in big ways. Everything that's global is local. In the last week, when I was in Europe, a week and a half, the government of Germany fell, the government of France fell, no confidence vote today, the government of Romania fell, the government of the Czech Republic, the Slovak Republic, all fell. Problems in Poland. Ukraine is like this thing that's way over here, and Donald Trump is this thing that's way over here. There is shit happening all across the world, sorry, before we even get to Taiwan, or North Korea, or Iran. The Turks are funding a civil war that's blown up in Syria and Aleppo. And all of Europe understands this, and whatever it's coming. So if you're Vladimir Putin and you're looking at this, what are you assessing about the United States, the greatest nation in the world? What are you assessing?
Paralysis.
Paralysis. We're not going to be in the game. And so if you're a European country, which has important relevance for world history, and this upheaval is going on, when the Germans catch a cold, everyone in Europe gets really the flu in a deep way because they're worried about what's going to happen. If you're a European nation, are you looking to the west or are you looking to the east? And what are you looking at moving forward? This is literally where they're at. And for young people in those countries, this is really a key moment for them, for what they're doing looking forward and what their futures look like. It's a defining moment. And we have a guy who's leaving, who wakes up some hours of the day, and we have a guy coming in who's episodically engaged or not. So for Europeans, and for much of the world, China, Iran, the Israelis, this is a really sobering time for them moving forward. So there's an important kind of impact of this, because the changing demographics that I'm talking about, I specifically study this rising American electorate, this changing voter. This is happening all across the world, not just in the United States. The engagement of voters and the inability of voters to really understand how their vote matters for policy, that disconnect is getting greater. So there's a disengagement of social and political life that's going on. This is changing governing, electioneering. It means it's making it harder to get the government to work. But electioneering, we do really well. We do electioneering better than anyone in the world. I'll tell the Israelis. But we do it better than anyone in the world. We're the best at running for office. We just can't get the offices to run. And the trains to run. So this presents certain challenges for us locally that are tied to more global trends. Tariffs, which the incoming president has talked about, are going to be used as a cudgel, as a focal point to move people along. That means what you're doing north of the border for Canada is we tax their beer, and in the southern border in Mexico, as everything that's manufactured and that we use is manufactured there and put together there. As you tariff those two nations, you're going to create huge ripple effects across the economy. When you also have to fund the government by December 21st. As the government runs out of money at midnight on December 20th. We hit the debt ceiling. Sorry, most of my classes tend to be in the debt ceiling. We hit the debt ceiling in January. The new Congress comes in. Trump's tax cuts that went up in 2017 and started expire at the end of 2025. And so the proposal they want to put together will add $7 to $8 to $10 trillion to the US deficit. It will be the single greatest impact on the deficit, any deficit in the history of the world. So the circumstances of decisions and the consequences of decisions that are before us in the next 6 months, in the next 3 months, are hugely consequential. And that's before you deal with any of the trials and tribulations within the House and the Senate and amongst other competing parties that figures as well. All right. So it was a powerful return by Trump, and I'm going to show you a picture of this here. It's a political comeback that's massive. There's no doubt about that. Their gains up and across down the ballot. And you might have seen this thing. This is from the MIT lab that ran in the Times, as I recall, in the Washington Post. This picture is from the Post. And if you look at this, there are some pockets of blue that you might be able to see, but what do you notice about the map? Where's it red? Southeast, all right? Right? Every swing state, every swing county, it's red everywhere. Everywhere. To show you the massive but small, the broad but not deep reach of what happened. Broad but not deep. It's not a mandate, but it is broad. It is subtle shifts. 90% of African American men voted for Donald Trump in 2020. 27% of African American men voted for Donald Trump in 2024. A threefold increase. That's a big, big number, a big deal in that sense, right? We can do the same thing with Latinos and other subsets of other groups, right? Trump was backed by a remarkable 1 in 3 voters of color. He improved amongst 2020 voters, younger than 30 black voters, and Hispanic voters. So you see this? Biden won Latino men by 23. Trump won them by 10. What's 23 plus 10? It's a 33-point swing. It's a 33-point swing. That's unheard of in American politics in the modern era. Big deal. Okay? Partly there's a backlash of trends going on here. Yeah, I put that here for you. Nobody can start trends. You're welcome. Right? But there was a backlash of trends against tech. That will continue. Against wokeism. That will continue. All right? And anti-politics kind of backlash. We're in this era where it's easier to say no and to stop things than it is to do things. It's harder to get things passed. It's easier to say no. So that makes it very difficult to pass legislation to fund the government, to process aid to Ukraine, to fund student loans, to fund Head Starts, to fund things like the earned income tax credit for children, the single greatest measure we have discovered to take children out of poverty since the Great Depression. And it's cheap to do that. It's not a lot of money. Okay? So there are broader changes that are going on here as a result of this. Here's potentially what could have happened. All possible election scenarios, and then I put in what could have happened. But notice what did happen? With an almost equal statistical chance. I just tried to rank them for you kind of like high, medium, and low to show you what the polls showed us. Looked like something like this. But what actually happened? This. Just by small amounts. Just by small amounts. And here's why. Is there anyone, see this category, this, I don't know, light gray category that says don't know, no. Is there anyone who doesn't have an opinion about Donald Trump after 10 years on the political stage who might identify themselves as an independent? for this election, we call that person a racist or a misogynist.
Or a liar.
Or a liar. Yeah, that number is 10%. That number is not 5%, it's 10%. And it went way over there, almost in total. There's a lot of mathematical machinations what you do with this. But this category of don't know or no opinion is reckless as a measurement, because people have an opinion about him. How do we know this? Because we ask them over and over again. 98.4%, 98.6%, something like that. Basically 99% of people have an opinion about Donald Trump. Okay? So if they're answering don't know or no opinion here, they are liars, because they don't want to say it. All right? So here's that mood ring, just to show you how to make anything up. Are you satisfied with the way things are going? No, they're not. 1 in 4 on election day. But what do you notice about the price of the stock for the months leading up to the election? It wasn't in a good place to begin with. It was structurally not a good place to be as an incumbent before you even get to inflation. Here's presidential approval. On election day, his approval was 39%. His average of the last year, 41%. Guess what's happened to his approval since he lost? It's gone up. Yeah, it's gone up. It's gone up. All right. His approval rating at 39%. Higher approval leads to better chance of winning. Look where he's at. I mean, he's better than Jimmy Carter. Well, when Jimmy Carter left office, Jimmy Carter's still alive. But when Jimmy Carter left office, he was on his like 3rd career, 4th career, right? So he lived a long time. Joe Biden doesn't have that time. You see Donald Trump, you see Gerald Ford. And then there's this great barometer from the University of Michigan. It's called the Consumer Sentiment Index. It kind of measures how people are feeling about the economy, about the future, about their family's future, about what's likely to happen. And if you have a barometer below 82, it's a great forward-looking indicator of your likely success. And you can see for Biden, it wasn't there. So what do you make of all of this? Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll give you my opinion here.
Okay.
What was the difference between 20 and 24 for black and Latino male voters? And the difference was a woman was running. They didn't want a woman to be president. I mean, that's.
We do see some evidence of this in the polls. And I remember I said gender and racial bias. Yeah, we see some evidence.
The evidence is right there, actually.
Yeah, so one of the things I did in one of these forums with the consultants is I stood up and said, so does it take 50 years for a woman to be able to run for office to be successful? And no, I mean, it was like dead silence, man. Nobody said anything. I don't think it's 50 years, but there is an issue here.
And
Yeah.
second, isn't it true that only 270,000 voters switched in 3 of the swing states? The election would have gone the other way.
Yeah.
270,000.
Yeah, not a lot of people. And I'll give you a really good barometer. To win Pennsylvania, okay, you have to win Philly by 500,000 votes. That's the test, okay? She won Philly by almost 300,000 votes. I mean, that's it. You win Pennsylvania and it's 19 electoral votes. We're in a different place because other cards fall together in the Monte Carlo simulation. So yeah, that 270 number is a big deal. Question?
No,
You sure?
Lots of questions.
Okay, all right. So here's the exit polls. Some of the exit polls. And again, I got them from all the networks and from the major centralizing medicine folks, still running through them. It's a lot of data to sift through. So white, no college, right? He gets 2 out of 3. But look at white college graduates. That should be her bread and butter. And look at it, which goes to your point about she's a woman. Yeah. Because, see that number 45? 46% of college-educated white women voted for Donald Trump. 46% in 2016. So Democrats have not improved in that number with female candidates. The dude, Joe, in 2020, he eked it out. Right? White, non-white, no college degree, right? They got 2 out of 3. Republicans basically 1 out. So you start to see some patterns to dig into and some subsets. So it is small segments of voters scattered across multiple areas. But I also want to remind you of a really important rule. Since 1992, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, what are those 3? Swing states. Since 1992, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have all gone the same way, and they've all gone with the winner every presidential election since 1992. And guess what happened this election? Same. Joe Biden was ahead, according to the polls in Wisconsin, of Donald Trump in 2020 by 11 points. He won by 0.6. Hillary Clinton was ahead by 8 points in 2016. She lost. Kamala Harris was ahead by 6 points in Wisconsin. Guess what happened? She lost. There's something happening, and it's not just limited to those states. Minnesota's the same, especially since 2012, right? Other states the same since that time. You expect his coalition to hold. You expect conservative voters to go with Donald Trump. Shocker. You look at his white evangelical number. Okay, up. White no college, kind of the same. But you ready? Check this out. This is where we start to get into the exit polls. So what I've done is take the exit polls and cross-tab them by, this is POS, Public Opinion Strategies. This is a Republican firm, right? So I've taken the exit polls by the Republican firm because I want the exit polls to be looked at by these folks to give me some sense of what's going on. Starr County, Texas, Trump wins by 16. Democrats won it by 73. 73 and 16 is what? It's an 89-point swing. Miami-Dade plus 11 from 24. See that? 35-point swing. Hillary Clinton won Miami-Dade County by 30 points. Kamala Harris lost it by 11. That's a 41-point swing. That's more than gender. It's an element of it, but it's more than gender. Yes, sir?
But the other problem is, so many people didn't vote. We had 7 million people voted less from Biden to Harris.
Yeah, the way I think we can think of it is that his voters voted kind of similar turnout to 2020. Turnout's even down in California, for example. But essentially his voters showed up, and Democratic voters and emerging voters didn't show up.
But why?
Change. And one of the consulting, the theme of change, she's not a change candidate. And they spent $95 million a day, but they never checked to see if it was working. Because they were doing everything. So one of the consultants, we spent money like crazy and we did everything we're supposed to do. But we never bothered to check and see feedback about whether it was reaching home. And I'll give you an example.
Why is that?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I went and observed voter contact in Nevada and in Phoenix about a month and a half out. Interest groups targeting voters, new emerging voters, principally women, 18 years old, first-time voters. Young Latinas, 18 years old, never voted, and guess who lives in their household with them?
Their domineering father.
Their dad and their brothers. And guess what party their dad and their brothers are, or who they're going to vote for? You contact that voter, give her literature, and then you go away, and you come back and contact that voter one time, in the next month. You're asking that young woman to do what?
Fight her family.
And it's not going to happen. And that's exactly what Democrats have done for the last 30 years. And that is not a model that can work anymore. You're not asking her just to make a leap of faith against her family. You're asking her to go into a place that she cannot go into and hold, and you're expecting her to do that in the voting booth. They're not going to the voting booth. It's a vote by mail election. They're all sitting down or having the ballot filled out for them, and here's what happens. It's a leap of faith, and so I argue to Democrats, it's a tool that you can't do that anymore. It's a model that worked maybe when I was young, but not anymore. Because there's this thing called podcast, there's this thing called YouTube, there's this thing called your father. There's all these other elements. And you start to see this in these, but you saw this in 2020, okay? You've seen this creeping before in Patterson, New Jersey, in the Rio Grande Valley, in Maricopa County, in Miami-Dade. The evidence was there. But Democrats masked it, in my view, because there was this thing called COVID. And they refused to see it. And it's been building for some time. Here we go. So, let's take the exit polling data and let's say, are you hesitant to vote for somebody? Right? Is there going to be a change in the administration from Biden? Right? So I want you, I'll put this up for a minute so you can look at it. Because we're trying to take the exit polling data for how people are feeling. It's hard because as a behavioralist, I want to know motivations and feelings, but it's hard to measure this. But there's a lot in here. No hesitations. These are hardcore Democrats who are going to show up early and often regardless of what happens. But those are not the voters that win elections. They show up. It's the young woman who's voting for the first time who has to vote against her family that you're asking to hold. And you're asking to hold abortion as the #1 issue for her. Well, she happens to be a lapsed Catholic. So guess what? She's got enough guilt to deal with. She's not going to go there. Right? Hesitations. Why? She won't be a change from the administration. She's too liberal. She's a Marxist, commie pinko. She's untested. We just don't like her. Which is code for what? She's a woman, she's black. Yeah, I've heard this a lot. Okay? I mean, like right in front of you when you're there. I would vote for her. What? There's who she is, right? Next house. See? But the idea is that just to test people on what's going on. And you start to see this. A lot of hesitations. Are people just hesitant? And then even Democrats come out and say things like this. This is Richie Torres, who's a member of Congress who loved to be governor of New York. All right? Where Democrats start firing at each other. This tweet received a lot of coverage. And kind of illustrates this kind of circular firing squad that Democrats had as a result of this. Lack of turnout, problem of inflation, distance from the Biden administration, unfavorable conditions for an incumbent. What would you do differently than the president, your boss? I'll get back to you.
Why do you think she did that? Do you think it's like she just was reluctant to throw him under the bus because they're friends? Because you'd have to think that that's obvious that you can't stick by him.
She has to be handled very carefully.
We said that.
She has to, it has to be, you have to walk through it and have it ready for her. I'm not saying she's dumb, I'm saying that she doesn't want to go off away from him,
Right.
unless they've already programmed it out. It's like her lack of perspective and discipline about what's obvious.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
The information out there seems to be that life was actually pretty good, or is pretty good,
Right.
with President Biden. Why are people so unhappy with it and wanting change when the data shows it's actually pretty good?
Right, so if you're explaining, you're losing, is the adage, right? So if you're explaining how good things really are, and people don't feel that way,
Why don't they?
there's a curious thing about inflation. What is it, when inflation goes like this, and then it slows, what does not happen? The base price doesn't change. So it does, gas doesn't drop way back. Milk doesn't, groceries don't, so the base that you're spending rises. And even though your wages may have crept up, even though XYZ may have clawed back for you, they've got a promotion, job market's pretty good, what you see is that saturation effect. That's that weight that's holding you down, which doesn't make you feel like you're getting ahead. So when you're telling people that they're better off and they don't feel, they then become hesitant to vote for you. It's the wrong emotional quotient, which is why this is as much art as it is science in that sense. It's like the moment, you're missing the moment. If you're explaining about Build Back Better and Inflation Reduction Act, and people don't feel that way, and look, what is one thing that Trump does really well? He taps into the emotions of people and how they're feeling, and those frustrations, and he taps into that. He's really good at that. It might be ugly about us, I get that, but he taps into that. And that's an effective thing that Democrats don't do. They're always explaining the nuances of shit. It's not like, boom, this is how it is, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Is that
Yeah.
why they can't see that they're possibly going against their own interests?
Yeah, that's why they don't see it right now.
They're saying we're more emotional than logical in this country.
Yeah, and that's sometimes ugly.
And mostly.
Yeah, it's ugly. Here's the turnout stuff, right? What happened, right? Here's this improving demographics, just to give you some idea of what it looked like. These aren't final numbers, but to give us some idea. I mean, they're hugely surprising, but in some ways predictable. Okay, much more varied in terms of what he did here. Okay, yeah. Okay, I don't want to blame young people as a college professor. However,
Is there anybody here who's a first-time voter? Because I saw a bunch of Americans at last week in the election.
You're whispering.
anyone a first-time voter? Would like to be a first-time voter? Coming up? All right, great. So this is from Circle. Circle is at Tufts. They're the preeminent kind of study group of young people, together with what's called the Harvard Young Persons Poll. But Tufts and Harvard had this rivalry anyway. So you had 42% of turnout in 2024. But notice the demographic of youth that we're measuring. Notice the age gap. I just want to make this clear, 18 to 29. Whether we're at Harvard or Sonoma State, we measure young people as 18 to 29 or 18 to 34. Any problem with that? It's a big difference between an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old and a 24-year-old or a 29 and 34-year-old, right? It's crap. It's a bad way to measure things, right? It's something to pay attention to in terms of what we're doing. Yeah. All right, so here we go. Let me show you some fun things. There's a great project at the University of Washington that measures, University of Washington, Seattle, that measures misinformation and disinformation, right? Big element of this. And this project that's done, the Center for Information and Politics, CIP, it's a really good project. In real time, they were tracking what was going on. So before people had really, we started doing stuff on the media and being talking heads, oh my gosh, what's going on? Is the election rigged? Is it rigged? Right? They're doing all these horrible things. They started doing this stuff to track it, what was going on, instantaneously. Kind of cool. Because what they're trying to do is drive kind of outcomes for what happens here. So we looked at this and we studied this, and there's a couple things we can do. So I want to show you these things. We'll get the Q&A here. But this is a great class exercise. Try to become a social media influencer to reach 10,000 followers in 10 minutes by creating bad news. It's really hard to do it the first time to 10,000. But do this exercise a couple of times, and all of a sudden you'll find someone in the crowd here that in 5 or 6 minutes can create 15,000 followers of bad news that's fake. It's a way to become a social media tycoon as a fake way to do it. It's a great exercise, and it's a game called Become Your Own, basically, social media maven. It's based upon work that was developed out of the information laundromat. This is developed by a couple of Dutch political scientists and a couple of colleagues of mine from grad school in sociology, done overseas in Europe. This is the best place to track mis or disinformation on the web. The best place, information laundromat. Let me show you how it works. Did you know, and I'm not trying to be inappropriate, did you know that colleges protect teachers who sexually exploit students? Did you know that Tim Waltz sexually assaulted students when he was a high school coach?
No.
Why not? It came out 3 weeks before the election. You see this Fair Observer website? Notice I haven't accepted cookies and donated money. You see it's independent, diverse debate. Got it? Bad shit going on with teachers. It was written by this person here, Sarah Jones. What do you notice about Sarah Jones? Take a look at her, young people. She's not real, right? She's an experienced reporter with decades of involvement in higher education and women's rights issues. Take a look at the picture.
She doesn't have decades of experience.
She has no decades of experience, and that's not a real picture of a real person. All right? Let's look at the Fair Observer. Oh, world news.
Oh yeah.
Woo. Check it out. This is a complete Russian disinformation website. This whole website is run out of a server in St. Petersburg by a Russian intelligence group. The whole damn thing. Okay? So don't do this at home. Let's just see who Peter Isaacson is. Let's check out his bio. Oh, there's Peter Isaacson. Almost looks like a real person. He's their chief strategy officer. At best, he's a Russian agent. Okay? At best. Most likely, he's not real. Not a real thing. All right? You know who runs the Fair Observer website? It's run by a disgraced Florida cop who has a warrant, several federal warrants out for his arrest from the FBI. And he runs a group creating fake websites for the Russians of defunct newspapers, like newspapers that went out at the turn of the last century in the progressive era. This whole website, this whole story, completely fake. All of it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the vast majority of these fake websites too tend to favor the right. They want.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see. Let's take a look at the Fair Observer, right? So it has, you know, let's look at some things they have going on here. See, the UN is bad at peace, right? Look at Gaza, right? What changed my mind about Alex Kaneski? What happens when you ignore genuine mental illness on a fake website, right?
Wait, how do we know they're fake, like, when we get on it? Just because
Go to the laundromat.
Boom! Couldn't ask you. You're
So that's kind of like a
Okay.
Snopes for political stuff. Kind
Yeah,
of.
here we go. You ready? So I'm going to, I cut and pasted it. I'm going to put it over here. Boom. Fair Observer. This is Tim Waltz as a child molester, basically. Hold on. Ready? Boom. See that score? 98.7? That is a 98.7% score that the story and the links have come from official Russian Twitter channels, official Kremlin channels. And yes, they will go to other places, like USA Today, but Warriors Wire, USA Today. Like fake CNN websites that look like CNN, but are not. It tracks the names of individuals. And yes, they do decline, like JSTOR, to find out articles because it gets reposted and retweeted onto real things. The way I'll close is this. I have a Twitter handle, not as David McCuan, a professor, but as Cedillo, S-E-D-I-L-L-O, M-A-R-C-E-N-E, Cedillo Marseille. This person doesn't exist. It is a Russian bot. So when I do stuff on the news, it gets retweeted through the Russian bot, and each post creates 38 to 40,000 additional bot posts by Cedillo Marseille, who's not me. But it's done and generated that way. And it goes on and touches real websites like LA Times, like New York Times, like others, and as a result, it spreads. And it becomes de facto real. Because it touches the real stuff. So you can use the information laundromat to check and see what's going on next time, right? But you can also see that things like this are a complete, not fabrication. Sorry, they're just made up. And this is a great thing we can do in class, at the university, and then learn from this, and then create our own bad news as a result. And then place markers. Try to get to 5,000 in a minute, do all these kind of things. Let's see what we can do. It's very helpful.
You guys have any databases about how many legit news organizations, like on TV specifically, pick up?
Yes.
Fake?
Yeah. Let me add one more thing. So there is this group. This is how you'll know. I know this religious name. Okay. This is the American Sunlight Project. This is run by Nina Jankowicz. Nina Jankowicz, it's a small operation. Nina Jankowicz was held in contempt of Congress for over a year and was interrogated by Jim Jordan and others because she ran a small outfit at DHS that dealt with misinformation and disinformation from places like Facebook. She started the American Sunlight Project, which is the best in the world open source place that looks at transparency and misinformation. Her lead researcher is a former student of mine, Ben, who just finished giving a talk at Strasbourg about this. But they run a whole program of exposing different elements, like the Russian doppelganger component that was outed in September for what the Russians were doing this particular election. They worked with the Department of Justice to do that. Okay? It explains everything that goes on. And the biggest current project they're working on is deep fake porn of members of Congress. And the reason that's important is because Congress won't do anything about this unless they understand the degree to which they are in deep fake porn run by Russian websites. It gets their attention, okay, in this regard. All right, that's a great place to stop. Any questions? Sorry. Sam, the college professor.
We got questions. We got the expert in front of you. Don't be shy.
All right. Yeah, what do you got? Sorry, as you can see, I do a lot of fun things in class. It's not all depressing.
You mentioned that there's been, we're in a big period of upheaval.
Yeah.
And I'm 60, so I've been voting for quite a while. It always seems like there's always a pendulum swing, like throughout history almost. And do you think that maybe even before like the 70s were kind of starting this, that?
Yeah, I mean, this starts like in '68. Okay, this kind of modern era of this element, this move to electioneering and this upheaval. But divided government generally produces things that are more positive than whole government, one party or another. We are at a critical, important period. And 2024 is a pivot from 2020. So we're in this period from 16 to 28, especially where there's gonna be a lot of upheaval. And how old is Donald Trump? 78. And he has poor lifestyle choices. So 78. He's closer to being done than not. What comes next? J.D. Vance? No one's scared of him, right? If Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense nominee, goes down, pops in Ron DeSantis, that provides Laura Trump, the head of the RNC, the opportunity to be the next U.S. Senator and or governor, and provides an opportunity for Matt Gaetz. This all gets engineered by Trump, but to keep it in the family is an important component. And in that sense, the dynastic component of it is what's different. But we are in this period of great kind of swing. That's going to, I think, continue. Yes, sir.
So, what do you think the Russians ruled in the election from 16, 20, and 24? How effective were they in determining the outcome?
They're hugely, that's a great question. It's hard to quantify impact. It is easy to quantify the tilt of information, the qualification of information. That's easy. How impactful it is, how much it matters, is a problem. As someone who we thought in our models that she might eke out a win, so we were paying attention to the strategies Trump et al. Were instituting for after the election, what we'd be going through like right now, and what that would look like. And that's where disinformation could be hugely impactful about moving perceptions and what's going on. Notice that since they won, and they won everything, what's happened to the problem of election fraud?
Crickets.
What's happened to the problem of whatever related to the conduct of elections? In fact, it's been a mandate. It's been the biggest, baddest thing that's ever happened in America. It's been unprecedented. It's not 1861, it's like, I don't know, even eclipses whatever election you can think of. It eclipses Reagan, is what the mandate they're trying to put forward. So the idea that we can measure information as a scalpel that's cutting away different elements of understanding, that we can do. Does it make a difference to outcomes? We're not quite there yet. Impactful, okay. Impressions, yes. Does it move people who didn't like Tim Walz because he's had this in his background, which is totally fake? We don't have evidence. Okay. Yes, hi, yes ma'am.
Well, I was wondering about exit polls and how that relates to mail voting.
Vote by mail, yeah. There's a couple of things that are really problematic. If turnout is down, what do you really want to know? Let's just kind of pan back from this for a second. If turnout is down, are voting by mail measures or exit poll measures really helpful? Because what do you really want to know if turnout is down? Who's not voting? And guess what you're not measuring? Why they didn't vote. So we're missing a lot. Let's start there. About people who matter mathematically in a big way. So that's important. Even vote by mail voters get surveyed under exit polls. They do, we reach out to them. And we actually engage them in big ways. Much better this way, this election than we had in 20 or 16. So they're not missing. They're not as representative, but they're not zero.
So you feel the exit polls, which includes people physically exiting?
Yeah, who are exiting as well as VPM. Yeah, vote by
You
mail.
think they're pretty accurate?
Yeah, they're actually pretty good. We've gotten a lot better because we were so shitty about it. So we had
Well,
nowhere
we
to go
go
but
up
up.
from there.
Yeah.